Some are calling for the same here. Already, many primary schools have this, and the Ministry of Education leaves it up to individual school boards to make the decisions around uniforms. So, should uniforms be dictated from the government or left up to individual schools? What did you both do? What happened with you?
I would have loved to have worn pants to school. I wear jeans a lot of the time.
So you
and
had
trousers.
to wear a skirt?
Had to wear a skirt. One of them was a kilt style.
Yeah, kilt.
I mean, how ridiculous. This is in Kawerau in the Bay of Plenty, I feel that uniforms are for teenagers it's used as a form of contraception is how I feel about it all.
There's a tweet.
Because they are hideous.
So
uniforms are a form of contraception.
They are designed to make, attractive pubescent
there's an entirely different
teenagers.
school of thought on that. You do know that, don't you?
The sentence of the afternoon. Yesterday was the eggplants. Today it's that.
They are hideous. They are hideous by and large. Simon was lucky.
Government doesn't determine that schools have to have uniforms.
No,
though,
it's
and
not
that
the
doesn't
government.
happen
It's the board, isn't
Board,
it?
yeah.
Oh,
Board
yes,
of
absolutely, the
Trustees,
boards,
yeah.
I went when I went to school in Wellington, in my fifth form year, the board decided not to have a school uniform any longer.
What?
Where
was that?
This was Onslow College, and I think they still don't have a uniform, I think. Someone's going to ring up and say that's wrong now, but I think it's right.
Were you just a rebel, Simon?
It was the school, and it was the time when boys wore their hair very long. I do remember that we had long hair, and then we were told next year you can't have long hair, and we were all lined up and we all stood with our chins on our chests so that because they were going to measure any hair that touched your collar, we were going to have to be cut, so we all stood.
Actual rulers.
This was at a time when boys commonly had long hair, but things got relaxed and the school recognised that actually this wasn't a big issue. Just as every single school in America has understood always. American schools don't have uniforms. And,
goodness.
And you'd have to argue that
I'm trying to think.
While there are many things wrong with American schools, perhaps that's really not one of them.
Because I'm a big fan of the uniform because you know why? It's a great leveller. You don't know whether parents are a judge or a janitor, whatever.
It's the shoes that give it away.
Yeah,
so in my time it was, do you have nomads or do you have the cheap knockoffs?
Oscar's nodding his head.
Yeah. That was
That's the argument for uniforms, but that's not the reason that schools have uniforms. They have uniforms because
why?
Represent.
Partly represent, but really because they buy into this idea of children need to be laced up into things that we can then say, you're over there and we've got you under control. And because we've got you under control, we can see that you're wearing the uniform. That's the real reason, surely, that schools have uniforms.
The real reason is structure and discipline and growing up correctly in the correct manner, isn't it?
Following
all
the
that kind
sheep
of
in the crowd.
Yeah. Well, that's putting a negative slant on it, really. I love wearing
uniforms aren't cheap either. I mean, your argument about it takes the financial pressure off, doesn't really.
This is what the PPTA said in 2017, that said feminised uniforms often disadvantaged girls. So from a practical stance, some girls find skirts and dresses to be restrictive, limiting the types of activities they do before school, from bike riding to sports.
Hideous.
So, really? So
absolutely.
you agree
in
with that?
In a skirt, and I biked to school again, it was hideous, and then in winter you're wearing tights and it's just awful. And the shirts are polyester and it's just not
So around
not
the panel,
nice.
gender neutral,
I'm all for it.
If you're going to have uniforms, gender neutral's great.
Lucky kids of today.
Lucky kids of today.
They don't know how easy they've got it.
Ah, yes indeed.
I don't think we should say that.
All righty, Simon Wilson, Rwani Parada, thank you so much for being with us. Julie Moffat, thank you so much. Checkpoint next. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, the house that's hurting a severely disabled teenager and potentially breaching his basic human rights. His parents say they've been waiting 7 years for a state house that's properly modified for their son's needs. A survivor of the Christchurch mosque attack meets US President Donald Trump at the White House. Our Prime Minister moves to calm frayed financial nerves in Australia. And mind the measles immunity gap. Doctors push for urgent action over the young and unimmunised. Any new names in the All Black squad? Well, we'll tell you shortly. And Baldwin Street bites back. The campaign to flatten the Welsh pretender.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. A survivor of the Christchurch mosque attacks, Farid Ahmed, says he enjoyed meeting US President Donald Trump today. Mr. Ahmed is in the US representing the Christchurch Muslim community as 27 survivors of religious persecution from 17 countries discussed religious freedoms. He spoke to our reporter, Alicia Foon.
Mr. Ahmed said he was too exhausted to go on tape today, but said he found Mr. Trump to be friendly and welcoming and listened well to the survivors who shared their plight and experiences. They included representatives from Turkey, North Korea, Iran, Myanmar and China, which has traditionally rejected any suggestion that it abuses religious and human rights. Mr. Ahmed says he was proud to be representing New Zealand and says he had a very busy day. He says he will be meeting with Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, tomorrow. Ko Alicia Foon tēnei.
The Prime Minister says she'll raise the deportation of New Zealand citizens with criminal records when she meets her Australian counterpart in Melbourne. Jacinda Ardern kicked off her two-day visit to the city by meeting Victoria's Governor Linda Dessau and speaking to investors at a lunch this afternoon. The key meeting of her trip, a formal sit-down with the Prime Minister Scott Morrison, will take place tomorrow. Ms Ardern says there are a number of reasons why it would be legitimate for New Zealand citizens to be deported if they've done something illegal.
But we have seen cases where there is also almost no connection of an individual to New Zealand who have been deported. I consider that to be a corrosive part of that policy, and it's having a corrosive effect on our relationship. So I'll continue to raise that as well.
Jacinda Ardern. A person has been taken to Christchurch Hospital with serious chemical burns. Emergency services were called to Barton Street in Woolston just after 2 o'clock this afternoon. Fire and emergency services are carrying out a decontamination process, but the origins and magnitude of the chemical incident are unknown. A police operation is underway in Dunedin's student quarter after reports a person pulled out what appeared to be a gun. The police are on the grounds around Otago University trying to locate the person. The Ministries of Housing and Social Development are being accused of breaching a severely disabled man's basic human rights, with his family saying they're still waiting for a fully accessible state house 7 years on. The 19-year-old has spastic quadplegia, meaning that he can't walk on his own and has severe curvature of the spine, can't toilet or clean himself, and is blind. His parents say the state house they're currently in is not fully wheelchair accessible, and critical rooms don't fit the hoist provided to lift their son to shower or move him. Housing New Zealand says steps are being taken to ensure this family's next house will suit their needs well into the future. It says their current house has been modified with a ramp and wet room and some wider doors. Latest figures show there are 556 households on the State House waiting list who need modified or more accessible homes. There'll be more on this story in Checkpoint after the news. Documents show the Health Ministry has been sitting on a series of recommendations from health experts to get more young people vaccinated urgently. The National Verification Committee says last year that a systematic programmatic approach was needed to close the immunity gap. A senior lecturer at the University of Auckland, Dr. Helen Petousis-Harris, says that unless the measles issue is properly combated, it will continue to crop up.
This is a cycle that continues. History would dictate that, yes, we'll quickly forget about it until the next time. But I think we're going to see a lot more of these outbreaks, given the global situation with measles, given there's a resurgence in many countries. It's going to keep walking off a plane into the community. So until we deal with this, it's going to continue to happen.
Dr. Petousis-Harris, the Ministry of Health says it is currently reviewing the best approach to ensure young people take up the vaccine. It's 5:04. There are 5 debutants in the All Blacks team to take on Argentina in their opening rugby championship match in Buenos Aires on Sunday morning. Sevu Reece has been named on the right wing, while prop Atu Moli, loose forward Luke Jacobson, first 5 Josh Ioane and Braden Enor are all in the reserves. Coach Steve Hansen says Reece, who was found guilty of assaulting his partner last year, has earned his place and they want to see if he can cope at test level.
Sevu's a guy who we didn't know too much about, and as the season's gone on, he's just got better and better as a player and as a person. You know, we got interest enough to say, hey, we need to keep looking at this guy, and then we went past that point and said, look, we're going to have to pick him, and now we want to find out if he can take the next step.
Hansen has picked Ngani Laumape and Anton Leonard-Brown in the midfield, with Geordie Barrett on the left wing and Ben Smith at fullback. The front row is Ofa Tu'ungafasi, Dane Coles and Angus Ta'avao, while flanker Sam Cane captains the side. The Silver Ferns coach Nolene Taurua says they've used their first 5 matches at the Netball World Cup to refine their game for tonight's clash with Australia. New Zealand faces the defending champion Diamonds in a match that will determine seedings for the semi-finals in Liverpool. Taurua says they're ready for the challenge after dominant wins over Malawi, Barbados, Singapore, Zimbabwe and Northern Ireland.
Every game we have been building not only through to Australia but the big teams in England and probably South Africa now. We've got varied strategies, so we're not just one-dimensional, and depending on the opposition we don't have to change too much because we've been working on a few things.
Nolene Taurua. Tonight's match between the Silver Ferns and Australia starts at 9:30. The England all-rounder Ben Stokes says he never wants to be involved in a super over again after the nail-biting Cricket World Cup final against the Black Caps. New Zealand-born Stokes suggested to captain Owen Morgan he should send out Jos Buttler and Jason Roy to bat the extra over, but Morgan wanted a left-right hand combination, with Stokes being a left-hander.
To go out there and have the pressure on you batting first to try and get as many runs as you can, it is a scary place to be, especially in the World Cup final. But I think I'd rather be out there in the middle trying to do it than have to watch, because that is the worst place to be, is when you watch and you know you can't influence something that's going out in the middle. It's not one of the things that I ever want to be involved in again.
Stokes says there was no way he would have bowled England's super over. That's the news.
A censored scene.
This could be like an arms race in terms of more and more intense and graphic content about teenagers and aimed at teenagers.
A name change.
I don't think we'll ever lose sight of just calling the basin, but it would do a lot in terms of bringing visibility to sportswomen.
A Highland Downs victory.
You could get more boys interested if you remind them that a lot of these are like war dances. There's one where you get to dance around and jump over a sword.
Give Morning Report a fling. Weekdays from 6, on air, online and on Facebook.
Then on 9 to noon, what timber from historic villas reveals about archaeological sites and climates of the past, with Auckland University Tree Ring Lab analyst Gretel Boswick. And after 10, British sports journalist and author Ed Hawkins on searching for the superhuman sports star. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For the upper half of the North Island, from Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine spells, isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow with some heavy and possibly thundery falls. Gisborne through to Waited Upper, mainly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow, occasional rain from the afternoon. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, fine spells and isolated showers tonight, occasional rain tomorrow. Marlborough and Nelson, cloud increasing with showers this evening. Rain tomorrow, heavy at times. Buller through to Fiordland, showers turning to rain this evening. Heavy and possibly thundery falls, becoming mainly fine tomorrow with the odd shower. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, high cloud increasing, patchy rain this evening. Mostly cloudy with rain at times tomorrow, rain becoming more persistent north of Ashburton in the evening. And Chatham Islands, a few showers. You're with RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thank you, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The parents of a severely disabled teenager who say they've been waiting 7 years for a fully accessible Housing New Zealand property believe their son's quality of life is suffering miserably as they continue to wait. The 19-year-old, who we will call Hami to protect his privacy, is unable to speak, is blind, can't toilet himself and has spastic quadriplegia and curvature of the spine. He can't walk on his own. He's fed through a stomach tube and needs around-the-clock care. The Mangere State House the family lives in is not fully wheelchair adapted, and they say critical rooms don't fit the hoist provided to lift Hami and can't easily accommodate other equipment to bath and care for him. Advocates for Hami and his family believe Housing New Zealand and the Ministry of Social Development are breaching the teenager's basic human rights by not rehousing him in a more suitable property. Dad's gentle tickling is Hami's wake-up call. He's rewarded with a giggle and a wide smile. Shower time, though, will not be met with the same enthusiasm because this house is not Hami's friend.
How long have you been waiting for a new house, a house that's better suited to your son's needs?
Supposed to be 7 years.
What do you think of this house? Is it right for your son?
This house is not right. Hard. But we need a good house enough for my son. It's very hard to everything to do inside. It's hard for me, hard for my family, hard for the support workers.
To appreciate just how hard that makes life, you need to get to know Hami a little better. Born at just 25 weeks, he's severely disabled.
So your boy now, can he walk?
No, he can't walk.
Can he see?
Can't see. There's only the hearing, that's the one thing.
So he can recognise your voice?
Yeah.
Can he talk?
They talk, but they know what they talk because they only, that's all they. Hey.
Hami has spastic quadriplegia, cerebral palsy, global development delay and severe curvature of the spine. He suffers seizures, his hands and feet are clenched and twisted. He can't toilet or clean himself and he's fed through a tube.
I get up when I hear his voice, but I know he wants to change. Change nappy, change from right to left, but it's so hard. But before I come back to bed to sleep for another hour.
Hami is utterly dependent on his family and caregivers, and they'd like to depend on his wheelchair, the hoist in a house that is supposed to make everyday tasks easier and safer. But they can't, because this house is inhospitable.
How does the wheelchair fit up the hallway?
It's hard, because too small.
Dad demonstrates what is a simple equation. The wheelchair without Hami is 70 centimetres wide with specialised seating that helps cocoon his buckled frame. And this is an old-school traditional state house. Think long, slim hallway with rooms off either side. It bears the scars of an ongoing battle with the wheelchair and other equipment, scrapes and bangs. And so does Hami.
We have to aware how he stretch his body, otherwise he can kick the wall. That's why it caused the bruise on his toenails and bruise on his leg or something like that.
That's Latu, one of Hami's support workers. She shows me Hami's departing big toenail, the casualty of contact with a hallway that leaves no room for error or unpredictability.
So, do you have to lift your son all the time?
Yes, all the time. That's all my job to lift, because I can't use this hoist, can't fit inside the room.
So your job is to lift your son?
Yes.
And the hoist, it's no good to you?
The hoist is not wet, because can't fit. That's the problem.
Can't fit in the bathroom?
Yes, can't fit in the bathroom.
And not enough room in the bedroom?
Not enough room in the bedroom.
When he says it's his job, it literally is. He was forced to give up paid work after his wife had major back surgery and was no longer able to move Hami. The family gets up to 3 hours a day carer support and survives on a benefit.
My normal job is a carpenter.
Would you like to be able to be a carpenter again?
Always. Always in my heart. That's my favourite job.
How difficult is it for your family, you having to give up your job?
They're difficult because the pay they bring from winds, not enough. Can't pay the bill, can't pay the food. There are a lot of things to do, but not enough. But we do our best to survive.
This is a proud, private family, but they've invited us all behind closed doors to see their daily battle with this house. It's shower time. Hami is stripped in his bed and then lifted by two people onto a bed bath. It's a cross between an elevated mesh sun lounger and a hospital gurney. He's covered with a towel as his carers manoeuvre him out of the bedroom and down the narrow hall to a very small bathroom. And it takes some manoeuvring. They juggle the bed, gently tuck his feet in and protect a jutting elbow. And then use an open door opposite the bathroom to get the angles right to get him into the shower. Sound tricky? It is. Here's Latu again.
I believe with this kind of disability kids, that's our loved one. Why it takes so long for this family to be struggle and upset me. It's true, it's very upset me to see our people struggle. And that's our goal of our country, to take care of the disabled kids, the elderly.
Housing New Zealand says it's converted the bathroom to a wet room, and it has, but it's still tiny. It takes two people to wash Hami in the bath bed. And there's no room for the hoist that's supposed to do the heavy lifting.
The hoist never fit. That's why we have lift.
Again, Dad's already demonstrated the lack of wiggle room with said hoist. It doesn't clear the shower rail and leaves little space for anything else. So it's parked back in the lounge where it sits idle. The hoist and the house are not friends either. This place is cold too. There's just a small fitted heater in the lounge. I've had my outside coat on the whole time. It's a chilly gauntlet from Hami's room to the shower, where the door has to be left open because the condensation sets off the house smoke alarms, a sound that panics Hami.
We hope we can have a house, a place, we have open bathroom for so we can on a heater inside, leave his clothes there, dry there, and for us, safe of a support worker and the parents, to use the hoist to bring in, put in a big bed to shower, dry himself, do everything before we go back to bedroom.
Once Hami is dried and dressed again, his carers rub his limbs to warm him up and moisturise his hands and feet. The bath bed that is tinged with mould, despite everyone's best efforts, goes back outside on the wheelchair ramp. It's a constant revolving door of equipment in, equipment out, equipment back in again. Old sheets cover the floor in Hami's room so wheels that are grubby from outside don't mess up the carpet. His room is the best one in the house. Social worker Alistair Russell is working with this family.
The potentials for infections from equipment that's left outdoors because of a lack of space, the basic safety issues in terms of lifting a young man of his size, doing that regularly without the equipment. I mean, you can't use the equipment because the house isn't big enough. It's a perpetuating circle of risk which needs to be addressed.
Housing New Zealand says it's widened some doors, but this house is still squeezing Hami out. His meals are delivered through a tube. But life around the kitchen table is important to this family, and they want Hami to be a part of that. But at the moment, it's not a good fit.
So sad, because we need the family together. Not the half of the family and one is not there. It's not good for the family to...
Hami's occupational therapist wrote to Housing New Zealand in May, reminding the ministry that in 2012 this house was identified as no longer meeting Hami's needs, and Housing New Zealand agreed at that time that the family needed to be rehoused. The same letter says care tasks are being carried out in a totally unacceptable and unsafe manner as a consequence, and the house doesn't fit equipment vital to Hami's health, therapy and keeping him out of hospital. It pleads for urgent action. Ministry of Social Development figures show of just over 11,000 people on the waiting or transfer list for state houses, 556 of those households need a modified or accessible house. MSD says it understands this is a difficult situation, and along with Housing New Zealand, it will continue to support the family. Social worker Alistair Russell again.
Housing New Zealand and the Ministry of Social Development, between them they are either assessing the needs, monitoring waiting lists and or providing the housing. Between them they need to get their act together. This is absolutely appalling. It is completely unacceptable. It is not okay. It hasn't been okay since day one, and 7 years later it is still not okay. When do we as a society accept our responsibilities to actually provide for those people who have the highest levels of need?
Hami can keep going to his special school until he's 21, but after that he'll be spending a lot more time in this unsympathetic house.
There's no place here, like open place for to look outside to the world and enjoy his life.
The family needs to stay out south for Hami's hospital care and school. And the battle both with this house and for another kinder one is wearing them down.
My son is on my heart, day and night. I can't sleep well at night because of him.
Because you worry?
Worry, yeah. But if they got the good praise for him, I think it must be better. But now on, I'm so worried.
So you just need a house that would make that a little bit easier for you?
Yes, yes please.
Well, we invited both Housing New Zealand and the Ministry of Social Development on the program to discuss the issues raised by that story. MSD declined, saying it's only been managing the social housing waiting list since 2014 and the family's case predates that. Housing New Zealand hasn't responded to our interview request, but both ministries did provide several statements. Now, the Ministry for Social Development says the family's priority for a housing transfer has now been raised from A10 to A18. Now, that's just 2 spots from the very top priority of A20. But this is where things get really interesting. Checkpoint asked for the specific date that MSD bumped this family up the priority list, and the ministries confirmed it happened 2 days ago. That's the day we started asking questions about this family's case. Now, MSD has now changed its original statement, has come back to us, and it says it actually did another assessment in May that wasn't included in its original timeline, and it moved the family up several steps in the priority list and only then jumped them 1 spot up following our questions. Housing New Zealand says the family's restricted in where it can live because of the school and health needs of their son. And a lot of consideration, it says, is being given to finding a house that meets their needs into the future. Housing New Zealand says it understands an occupational therapist visited the family yesterday. Not so, says the family. We asked what percentage of Housing New Zealand stock is fully modified and accessible. It did not provide that information, but it says it partners with many organisations to make thousands of modifications to properties. It's now 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm really keen for your feedback on that story. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. What is our responsibility to house our most vulnerable, and how long is it acceptable to wait for a fully accessible house for a severely disabled young man? Let us know your thoughts. A survivor of the Christchurch mosque attack was among a group of people from 17 countries who met with the President Donald Trump in the Oval Office to discuss religious freedoms. The White House says all 27 participants were survivors of religious persecution and also included representatives from China, Turkey, North Korea, Iran and Myanmar. Foreign Editor Graham Acton reports.
Sitting at his desk in the Oval Office, Donald Trump was surrounded by a group that included representatives from oppressed minorities across the world.
What you have in common is each of you has suffered tremendously for your faith. You've endured harassment, threats, attacks, trials, imprisonment, and torture. I got to know many of you and helped you get some of you out of the difficult situation that you were in. I'm very proud of you, and the way you've reacted to a different life is a tremendous thing.
Christchurch mosque attack survivor Farid Ahmed, who lost his wife Husna in the shootings, was seated in his wheelchair just to the right of the president's desk. Speaking directly to Mr Trump, the senior leader at the Dean's Ave Mosque thanked him for America's support following the attacks and for continued US support in standing up for persecuted minorities around the world.
Mr President, thank you from New Zealand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your leadership, standing up for humanity, standing up for religious groups and their rights. And thank you for supporting us in the 15th March tragedy in Christchurch. And God bless you, and God bless United States.
Well, thank you very much. And you went through a lot. I know all about what happened, and that was a terrible situation. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Also there today was the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize winner Nadia Murad, a member of Iraq's Yazidi minority, who survived sexual slavery under the Islamic State in 2014 and has since advocated for refugee and women's rights and peace for her people.
Today you can solve our problem. Now there's no ISIS, but we cannot go back because Kurdish government and the Iraqi government, they are fighting each other who will control my area. All this happened to me. They killed my mom, my 6th brother. They left behind them.
Where are they now?
They killed them. They are in the mass graves in Sinjar. And I'm still fighting just to live in safe.
Jua Halam, a Uyghur Muslim, explained to the president that her people are under extreme pressure from the Chinese government, which is accused of holding at least 1 million people in detention centres, including her father.
I haven't seen him since 2013.
Where is that in China?
That's in the west part of China. The region in Chinese is called Xinjiang.
Yeah.
We call it Uyghur region. So far we have...
How long has your father been gone?
He has been in jail for 5 years. And we don't know how long he will still be in there. Anyone who goes to ask about anybody's family members' news will never make their way back to their own homes.
The Trump administration has been conspicuously quiet about the fate of the Uyghurs, while the US and China debate their way out of the current trade war. Also really on the agenda of the White House has been the appalling situation still faced by the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, and the US still refuses to classify the violence against them by the Burmese army as a genocide. Rohingya Representative Wai Wai Nu told Mr Trump his people are keen to eventually return to their homes in Myanmar's Rakhine state.
Most of the Rohingya refugees are willing to go back home as quickly as possible. So what is a plan to help us? So thank you very much.
And where is that exactly? Where?
Bangladesh refugee camp.
Bangladesh, right next to Burma.
I see.
The Rohingya have been run out.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Donald Trump says his administration will shortly announce new measures aimed at protecting religious minority groups, though he did not provide any details. For Checkpoint, Graham Acton, Tene.
There are 5 debutantes in the All Blacks just named First Team of the Year. Sevu Reece starts on the right wing, while prop Atu Mole, loose forward Luke Jacobson, first 5, Josh Ioane and Crusaders back Braden Ennor are all on the bench for Sunday's Rugby Championship clash with Argentina in Buenos Aires. Coach Steve Hansen says Reece, who was found guilty of assaulting his partner last year, has earned his place, and they want to see if he can cope at test level.
Sevu's a guy who we didn't know too much about, and as the season's gone on, he's just got better and better as a player and as a person. You know, we got interest enough to say, hey, we need to keep looking at this guy, and then we went past that point and said, look, we're going to have to pick him, and now we want to find out if he can take the next step.
And Steve Hansen believes rookie playmaker Ioane is ready for internationals and the pressure of backing up star first 5 Beauden Barrett, despite having played just 1 season of Super Rugby.
We've got a lot of confidence in Josh as well. Like, if you're going to put him on the bench as your number 2 10, then you've got to believe in him. Yeah, I think if he gets the opportunity, he'll go okay.
And And with Sonny Bill Williams injured and most of the Crusaders missing the trip to Argentina, Hansen has picked Ngani Laumape and Anton Leonard-Brown in the midfield, with Geordie Barrett on the left wing and Ben Smith at fullback. Flanker Sam Cane will captain the side. We're now joined live by RNZ rugby correspondent Joe Porter to talk over the All Blacks team and Argentina's chances of claiming their first ever win over New Zealand. Hey Joe, 5 debutants. What does that tell us about the team?
Well, it tells us, of course, that many of the Crusaders players, the first choice All Blacks, have been left at home to rest up after winning their 3rd Super Rugby title in a row. It also tells us that coach Steve Hansen and the selectors are still looking to build depth. They're still looking to test combinations and probably haven't settled on their first choice lineup heading into the World Cup. It gives these guys a chance to show their wares and perhaps force their way into World Cup selection sort of thinking, when at the moment they're probably not. So it says that the World Cup is the ultimate end goal at this season. The Rugby Championship is just a byproduct, and they don't mind losing a few games on the way if it gives them glory at the World Cup in Japan in November.
So for some of these players, will this be their one and only chance to show what they've got to impress?
Yeah, quite possibly. Guys like Ngani Laumape, who you just mentioned, and of course debutant Sevu Reece, Braden Enow, they may only get this one test during this Rugby Championship. Of course, there's only 4 games or so before the All Blacks head off to Japan, so there's not a lot of chances, and the All Blacks will be wanting to nail down their top lineup before they go. So yes, it is possibly the one and only chance for some of these guys. So a lot of extra pressure, I guess, on their shoulders, but what they'll be told is just to play their role, do their thing, the things they do well as best as they possibly can, and the rest will follow. So yeah, a big chance for these guys to impress, and hopefully that pressure doesn't get to them.
And what about Argentina? They've never beaten the All Blacks. Can they do it this weekend?
Well, yeah, 28 attempts. They've never done it before. Look, they'll sniff a chance against an understrength New Zealand team. They've, 5 debutants, a lot of experience missing. The Crusaders' front row is not there, of course. It was the All Blacks' front row. So there's a lot of sort of, I guess, chinks in this All Blacks armour this time round. The Argentinians are essentially the Haʻi Warriors side from Super Rugby, who, of course, made the final against the Crusaders. So they've been playing good rugby all season. They don't have to change a lot. They're used to playing alongside of each other. However, they do have to come back from New Zealand, having gone to Christchurch from Buenos Aires for that game. They've now travelled back. So there's a few things working against them to travel. Of course, they might be a little jet-lagged or fatigued after what's been a massive Super Rugby season for the Haʻi Warriors. But it is possibly their best chance they'll get in some time to knock these All Blacks over for the first time. And of course, the passionate Buenos Aires crowd will really get in behind them, and the Argentinians will start strong and start fast. So if the All Blacks can weather that storm for the first 10-20 minutes, I think they'll have a good chance of going on and winning. But yeah, not a bad chance for the Argies to try and sneak this one.
No, we will not let them have it. They've taken the World Cup is gone. They've taken our steepest street. We'll not have a bar of this, Joe.
Yeah, well, look, I don't think they're going to win. In all honesty, I think the All Blacks will get up by about 20 points. I think the Argentinians might be a bit gun-shy. I don't think they're going to perform as well as they could this Sunday for some reason.
All right, good news. Joe Porter, our rugby correspondent there. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Prime Minister visits Australia for the first time since Scott Morrison's re-election. A dejected group of black caps arrives home and apologises for letting the country down. And have the experts got it right? Baldwin Street bites back. We would love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program so far tonight. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or do send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Susanna, sorry, with the headlines.
A survivor of the Christchurch mosque attacks, Farid Ahmed, says he enjoyed meeting US President Donald Trump today. Mr. Ahmed is in the US representing the Christchurch Muslim community as 27 survivors of religious persecution from 17 countries discuss religious freedoms. He says he found Mr. Trump friendly and welcoming and listened well as the survivors shared their experiences. Infectious disease experts warn that a generation of New Zealanders are still vulnerable to contracting measles due to a lack of a national approach. Health Ministry documents reveal it was advised in 2017 that more young people needed to be immunised urgently. The warning comes as public health clinicians have notified passengers from 2 domestic flights that they have been exposed to the virus. A Taranaki woman says she'll never use an electric blanket again after one caught fire on the bed she and her baby were lying in. 24-year-old Brittany Nawini and her 1-year-old son Shiv escaped unscathed, but their Waitara home was gutted in the blaze. Fire investigators say it's a timely reminder for people to ensure they're using electric blankets safely and that they're not damaged. The Prime Minister says she'll raise the deportation of New Zealand citizens with criminal records when she meets her Australian counterpart in Melbourne. Jacinda Ardern is on a visit to Melbourne and will sit down with Scott Morrison tomorrow. Ms Ardern says while it's legitimate for people to be deported if they've broken the law, some of those sent back across the Tasman have no connection with New Zealand, and that's a corrosive part of the policy. A Far North Māori leader has kicked off legal proceedings against the government over its failure to act fast enough on climate change. Mike Smith, Ngāpuhia Ngatikuri, filed the papers in the High Court of Wellington this afternoon. He's seeking a declaration from the Crown that it will halve greenhouse gas emissions in the next decade and eliminate them by 2050. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Time for business now with Madison Reedy. Hi, Maddie.
Hello.
Fonterra has a new environmental commitment. What is it?
Yeah, sticking with climate change, what Susanna was just talking about there. This is to do with coal, a coal commitment, one could say, from Fonterra. Now, it's announced today that it's not going to install any more coal boilers at its factories, nor will it increase its capacity of coal burning. Now, Fonterra uses coal in the process of mostly drying its whole milk powder to send around the world. Now, it has 32 factories where it does this process, and 40% of the energy used at those factories does come from coal. The rest of it comes from electricity sourced through things like wood chip processing and other more renewable sources. But it does say that it wants to go as fast as it can to remove using coal completely from its processes, but it does say that it can't do that at just the flick of a switch. So it's going to take a staged approach to do this. Now, they say that they're having to do that in a staged, phased way because there's not the alternative sources at the scale that it needs in terms of energy to produce the amount of products that it does daily. And it says that the transition to no coal will require significant investment in other sorts of energy resources. But it does say that this commitment that it's announced today will bring forward its plan to reduce reliance on fossil fuels by an entire 11 years. And they're saying that this will make them feel a lot more confident about reaching that net zero emissions target come 2050. Now, this does sit within its other environmental goals. It also plans to reduce its use of water at its factories by about 20% by as soon as next year. It also wants to package all of its products in 100% recyclable or compostable products by 2025. Now, in response to this coal commitment today from Fonterra, environmentalists have certainly had their say. The Coal Action Network, Aotearoa Group, says that it's been calling for Fonterra to do this for about 6 years now, so it's glad that it's finally listening and doing something about it. But it does say that now that it's committed to this, it wants more transparency from Fonterra about its use of coal, and it wants to see on paper a phase-out process as to how it's going to stop using coal completely at some stage in the future.
Interesting. Okay, you've also got an update for us on the saga that involves ANZ's former CEO, David Hisco, whose kind of departure was somewhat controversial. What's happened?
It was. So we've had an update this afternoon, just recently. The shareholders in ANZ, or some of them at least, have started a bit of a revolt against ANZ, particularly the KiwiSaver provider Simplicity. They just have a very minor share in ANZ, but are a shareholder all the same. They've asked ANZ, the country's largest bank, should we add, to hand over the valuations that it did on a house that was reportedly sold to David Hisco's wife at a price lower than what they bought it for back in 2011. Now, Simplicity says that this was a suspicious transaction and it wants more disclosure on how ANZ went about this. They're obviously not pleased with the level of disclosure and the information that they and the public have been given thus far. far. Now, Simplicity says that it is considering legal action if ANZ doesn't oblige in handing over this information. They want to possibly go to the High Court to seek a ruling that would order ANZ to disclose this information to its shareholders. Now, ANZ has actually replied to Simplicity's concerns earlier this month. Now, a letter that was dated the 5th of July, which I've been sent, says here from ANZ that we've been as open and as transparent about the departure of David Hiscoe from ANZ as we could be, given employment and privacy laws. And as stated publicly, he mischaracterised some of his expenses, but that when they were talking about this property sale, ANZ said that they bought the St Heliers Bay Road home in Auckland in 2011, and Mr Hiscoe and his family rented that home off the bank until they subsequently purchased it in March 2017. This letter says that the sale of the house was completed after appropriate independent valuations undertaken by registered valuers and tax advice. Now, they do say also that they are cooperating with the Financial Markets Authority, who are actually doing an investigation into this transaction as well. So we'll wait and see what comes out of this shareholder saga.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick spin around the markets.
The NZX Top 50 Index closed up 0.8% tonight. That's a rise of 86 points to close at 10,741. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 67.4 US cents and 54.3 to the British pence.
Wow. Okay, thanks, Maddie. That's Madison Reedy with our business update. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has sought to quell any investor angst in Australia on the first day of her brief visit to Melbourne. The Reserve Bank here has recently sent jitters through the financial sector across the ditch with its increasingly staunch approach to the major Australian-owned banks and insurers. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, is in Melbourne.
A flying visit to Melbourne, 2 days, 2 set-piece events. Jacinda Ardern touching down this afternoon with a to-do list to boot.
Lovely, yeah, it's so lovely to have you all here, very much. Absolute pleasure.
With formalities aside, a brief sit-down with Victoria's Governor, it was straight to business. A lunch hosted by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, 15 Australian investors with money already in New Zealand, or those actively considering.
New Zealand is open for business, but we are encouraging investment that will contribute to New Zealand's economy, the growth of jobs, and overall the kind of investment that will grow our well-being.
Australian media have noted jitters in the financial sector caused by New Zealand's Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr in recent months. Revelations this week shocked some over the ditch, with the bank pulling the handbrake on the sale of AMP's New Zealand and Australia life insurance businesses, hot on the heels of its increasingly tough stance on the major Australian banks and their capital buffers.
I understand that probably you think that you've come here to ask me a few questions. I have every intention of asking you many, many more.
Following the meeting, Ms Ardern said the investors had no questions about the Reserve Bank, that it wasn't raised at all. But she had a message for a wider audience, suggesting critics' fears were no more than scaremongering. A topic she was more ready to raise, the government's plan to introduce a national security and interest test for foreign investment. That would require the Overseas Investment Office to consider national interest when rubber stamping sales. Ms Ardern actively seeking investors' views on the proposal.
New Zealand is unusual in the fact that we don't have such a test. Australia does, other counterparts, Canada, for instance, does, and we think it's high time that we do as well. But at the same time, as I say, we also see room at the same time as we go through these reforms to remove some of the red tape that some of those frequent and reliable investors may be experiencing.
Ms Ardern is soon to deliver a speech to roughly 2,000 guests at Melbourne Town Hall on the topic of good governance. But all eyes will be on the main event to take place tomorrow, an official sit-down with Scott Morrison, the first since he defied the polls and secured another term for the Liberal government in Australia. The conversation will be wide-ranging, covering both countries' Iraq deployment and China's influence in the Pacific. The two last held formal talks in Auckland in February. At the time, Ms Ardern singled out Australia's strict deportation policy, calling it corrosive to the Trans-Tasman relationship. She's used the same word again today and has promised to raise the matter again tomorrow. Checkpoint recently reported criticism of Ms Ardern from deportees, saying she's all talk and no action. It'll be more talk tomorrow, but maybe a chance to prove New Zealand hasn't given up. From Melbourne for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A Taranaki woman says she's lucky to be alive after an electric blanket burst into flames on the bed she and her baby were lying in. The 24-year-old and her 1-year-old son escaped unscathed, but their house has been gutted. She says she'll never use an electric blanket again, and the fire service says it's a timely reminder for people snuggling. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Brittany Nawani had been at a work function in New Plymouth last Friday with her husband Lucky when their youngster Chev became restless and she decided to return home with him. When she got to their Nelson Street home in Waitara, she turned on the electric blanket and prepared Chev for bed before lying down with him while he settled. She then noticed something was horribly wrong.
A few minutes after laying in the bed, I've noticed that there was a bit of light coming from under the blanket, so I've lifted it up. And that's where I've seen the fire starting. So I've ran out of the room, put my son out near the lounge room, and then I've gone back in, switched it off, called the fire brigade. I've then gone into the kitchen and got the kettle to try and put some water on it, but it was too late by then. It was already spreading through over the bed and through the house. I just had to get out.
Brittany says the experience was frightening.
I came out of the house and I was screaming for the neighbours, and I'd called my husband at the same time, and yeah, it was quite full on. I actually had to go into the neighbour's house, so I didn't, see the house burning down pretty much, because yeah, it was just too late.
And you were worried for your little boy?
Yeah, he was screaming. I had to get him out of there. I didn't want him to see any more than he already had seen. And the way that it was spreading, I knew, if I had stayed in there any longer, it could have been one of our lives that have lost.
Lucky says he received a distressed call from his wife at about 8:30.
My partner rang me up, Brittany rang me up, and she was in tears saying that, our house is on fire. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, it's on fire. And I'm like, so where are you at the moment? She's like, I'm outside. I'm like, yeah, so you get away as far as you can from the property, and just let the fire brigade, let them arrive, and then
Lucky emigrated to New Zealand 9 years ago from northern India. He says it's Brittany who feels the cold most, but he's not keen on using an electric blanket again. And there's no argument from her either.
Hell no. Yeah, I don't know, you got the idea in there that they're not safe and stuff, but you do your best to, store them away safely and use them as advised, but you never think that it could, destroy your whole home and potentially lives.
Andrew Cotter is a specialist fire investigator and fire risk manager at Fire and Emergencies New Plymouth Station. Mr Cotter was on one of 3 fire appliances that attended the Waitara blaze and confirmed an electric blanket caused the fire. He says it's a timely reminder to use them safely.
There's a whole lot of tips that you can follow, such as inspecting them to make sure there's no damaged wiring, no damaged controllers like cracks in the controller casing, exposed wires, and no kinked elements in the blanket itself. So it's about looking after them and using them properly. We also recommend that people do not lie in bed with them while they're on, because that can cause hot spots.
Mr Cotter reiterated the importance of smoke alarms, that families have an escape plan, and that people should never hesitate to call 111 in case of a fire. Meanwhile, Lucky and Brittany, who are fully insured, say beyond escaping unscathed, if there's one silver lining to the disaster, it's the way the community has rallied around them.
The people around here in the community have been amazing. They've been doing some, donations and bringing us food and stuff like that. And, Red Cross from Waitara, they bought us all, like 3 of us, $50 each worth of, innerwears and stuff like that from warehouse, which has been amazing. Yeah, so, and the friends from Brittany's Play Centre, they put us up in their own home, which has been, so it's been amazing.
The Nawanis say they are yet to decide whether they will move back into the home once it's repaired. I Waitara, mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin aho.
And it's about 8 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Do you trust your electric blanket or do you prefer a hottie? Lower risk. The Silver Ferns will face off against the other unbeaten team in their group, defending champions Australia, at the Netball World Cup in Liverpool tonight. Both teams have qualified for the semi-finals after 5 dominant wins each, but there's still a lot riding on this key matchup. Australia tops the pool with New Zealand second based on goal average. Our sports reporter Ravinda Hunia is in Liverpool. We'll speak to her in a moment, but earlier she asked Silver Ferns assistant coach Deb Fuller what key things she and the team have learnt so far.
The thing about World Cup is that you go into games a little bit you go into games a lot blind when you haven't seen enough of the opposition. We don't get as much intel on the African girls and the Caribbean girls before we play them, so you're making assumptions on their game style and their ability. And it was interesting in the Barbados game having the athleticism of those girls being able to match people like Bailey Mears, who's got an amazing vertical jump. Just having their athleticism match hers was wonderful to see and a bit of a surprise. So now we're going into the phase of the tournament where we're very in tune with who the opponents are and what their strengths and weaknesses are.
So you've already mentioned that today, although it was a day off for the team, was a lot of analysis for the coaching staff. So what did today look like for the coaching team?
Knowles and I just got together and had a look at the Northern Ireland game, and as you do, you pull out areas in the game that you want players to pay attention to. You know, at this stage of the competition, you're not going to save the world, but there are little 1% of things that you could also improve on. So everything remains the same. The structures that we've been coaching and the game plan that we've had since last year has just evolved, and we're at the final stages of seeing if it of testing the game plan. So today was about scouting opposition, looking at the game management, and just there's 32 quarters for each position that we've got to cater for. So there's a bit of science behind that, but I just leave that to our expert physio and medical staff. And yeah, it's just pulling all the pieces of the puzzle together.
And how or when do you have the time to debrief this with the team?
We had a team meeting, so we had a team meeting at 2 o'clock, then we were training from 3 to 5, and then we were back for another session from 5 to 6. So, yeah, the girls have had a pretty full-on afternoon, but they did get the morning off, which is great. Yeah, they came in really fresh for our team meeting at 2, which is good to see.
Silver Ferns assistant coach Deb Fuller speaking to sports reporter Ravinda Hunia. And Ravinda joins us live now from outside the M&S Bank Arena in Liverpool, where the Silver Ferns will play in just over 3 hours. Kia ora, Ravinda. What are the Silver Ferns' chances?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, the Silver Ferns, based on current form, are looking pretty good. Traditionally, you'd see Australia coming in as the giants, and they are in this competition as well. But no one's writing off the Silver Ferns this time. In fact, Australian Diamonds coach Lisa Alexander said not to refer to them as the underdogs purely based on their form. So they're looking pretty good right now.
That's positive news. And what about South Africa? South Africa play England afterwards. What are your predictions for that one?
This game is going to be an absolute cracker. It'll be hard to determine who will be the winner there. South Africa yesterday officially qualifying for their first ever World Cup semi-finals. That's a huge step forward for them. Of course, their coach is former Australian coach Norma Plummer, who will say goodbye to the game at the end of this tournament. So a great way to send her off. The last time England and South Africa played, I believe, was at the Quad Series that was held in New Zealand, and South Africa beat England. So tonight's game will be very, very interesting between those two sides. And of course, the Silver Ferns and Australia would have played by then, but they will be watching that game very carefully because that result will determine who they play in their semi-final.
Thanks, Ravinda. We'll keep all our fingers and toes crossed. That's Ravinda Hunia, who was joining us from M&S Bank Arena in Liverpool, where the Silver Ferns are about to play, well, in a little over 3 hours. And RNZ will be live blogging the match, which starts at 9:30 tonight, New Zealand time, so you can follow every move. It has been a tough week for Kiwi icons, the Black Caps, and Baldwin Street lost titles that many thought were in the bag. But a handful of Dunedin Knights aren't giving up the fight on the latter just yet. As our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown found out, one way or another, the record for the steepest street is coming home.
Guttull's going to push for two. They've got to go. Throat's got to go to the keeper's end.
Rules are funny things, especially when they're used to pick a winner. That's when things really can be decided by the barest of margins.
For the steeper street, they had 10 criteria. The prime one that we had to meet was that they should have a steepness over a 10-metre section.
That's Gwyn Headley, a resident of the Welsh town of Harlech, who led the charge to have Fiordeth Pen Lech crowned the steepest street in the world. After toppling Baldwin Street from its perch, he told Guinness World Records that he sympathised with Dunedin, but a record is a record, figures are figures, it's inarguable. Well, enter Dunedin surveyor Toby Stoff, who says figures are as arguable as super overs and overthrows.
They're not comparing apples with apples, you know what I mean? What they have is they've got a reasonably steep street, right, but with some sections that are steeper than others, whereas we've got a steep street which is very steep over its entire width.
Now, speaking of fruit-based analogies, it sounds like sour grapes. But Mr. Stoff believes the measurement of Fiordeth Pen Lech was taken around a curve at the inside of the road, providing a far steeper gradient than the centre line.
So what they've done is they've just cherry-picked a particularly steep section of that street. They haven't measured it on the centre line. And if you're designing a road, like all road design manuals, when you're talking about road gradient, they refer to centre line gradient.
It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but we checked with Guinness World Records and it turns out the measurement was taken from the inside verge of the road, which is permitted within the guidelines, but is a huge disadvantage for straight roads like Baldwin Street. To demonstrate the point, Toby Stoff, who is a licensed surveyor for Clark Fortune McDonald, took the measurements of a similarly steep and curvy street in Dunedin. The gradient on the inside verge of a curve on Lancefield Street in the suburb of Balaclava across town was 33.2%. Very close to Baldwin Street's previously record-holding gradient of 35%. But taken from the centre line, that gradient drops to only 26%, demonstrating his point about the new record holder in Wales. Mr. Stoff doesn't expect Guinness World Records to change their guidelines, so he proposes another solution.
They've taken something that's ours, we've got to take it back. We've got plenty of unformed legal roads that are probably being used as four-wheel drive tracks. All we'd have to do is go and metal it, seal it over a 10-metre stretch, and we get the title back.
But Otago University student Ben Russell is proposing an even simpler solution, calling on Dunedinites to show up to Baldwin Street on August the 1st with all the concrete they can find and pour it down from the top of the street to increase the gradient.
I was sick yesterday. I thought it might have been a good way to not only lift my spirits, but see what the rest of the city thinks, and it came off pretty well. If you know the Hugh Grant movie, The Englishman, who went up a hill and came down a mountain, where actually in Wales they made a hill into a mountain after discovering that the hill beside their town wasn't a mountain, so they trucked a whole lot of dirt up to the top and sat it down on top until it actually became a mountain. Kind of the inspiration for how it started.
So far, 500 people on social media say they will join him, and almost 2,500 have indicated they're interested. Mr. Russell says if it's unsuccessful, he may take the opposite approach and fly to Wales to flatten their street a bit. He says only imagination and money stands in the way of Baldwin Street's glory. Enterprise Dunedin director John Christie says it's great to see just how much Baldwin Street's record means to Dunedin.
I think there's been a few good suggestions on ways that we might be able to get the title back, but I guess it's all going to come down to how much effort you have to put into getting that title. We're certainly very keen to see what the community would come up with and would certainly encourage it.
So while the title sits with the United Kingdom at the moment, just like our Black Caps, Dunedin's residents won't give it up without a fight until the last. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
That's the fighting spirit. You go, Baldwin Street. And to the US now, the US billionaire Elon Musk is famous for pushing the boundaries of technology. Now he's applied to US regulators to trial a system connecting the human brain to a computer interface. Using Bluetooth-enabled implants, he claims the devices could enable telepathy and repair motor function for people with injuries. He says in an earlier test, a monkey was able to control a computer with its brain. Elon Musk spoke about his plans at the California Academy of Sciences.
This, I think, has a very good purpose, which is to cure important diseases and ultimately to help secure humanity's future as a civilization relative to AI. This, I think, has tremendous potential, and we hope to have this aspirationally in a human patient before the end of next year.
The BBC's technology reporter Jane Wakefield has more on how it might work.
The plan for it is to have a way of connecting the human brain to a computer interface that will then allow people to move the computer and start doing things. So people that are paralysed would be able to get some movement back. People that have a problem with their brain that means they can't speak could perhaps speak via the computer. So there's all kinds of medical uses for this. And of course, the more further out application would be allowing people to have sort of superhuman cognition, which is a little bit more scary. In terms of exactly how it works, they didn't really go into huge detail in this presentation, but there's a probe that has 3,000 electrodes attached to flexible threads which are thinner than a human hair, and these can monitor the activity of 1,000 neurons. And one of the advantages of the system, because obviously there are systems like this already out there on the market, is that this is able to target very specific areas of the brain, which would make it safer surgically, and it would also mean that they would be able to send back recordings of the movements in the brain and the sort of impulses in the brain, which would then mean the machine learning system could work out exactly how to stimulate the patient.
Jane Wakefield there on Elon Musk's bold new superbrain plan. Let's go back to a story we had earlier in the program about a family in South Auckland who say they've been waiting 7 years to get a wheelchair-friendly, fully accessible state house. A lot of you have got in touch about this story. This from Judith. I am the parent of a 25-year-old with an intellectual disability. We are middle-income New Zealanders, both in work, live in a dry, comfortable house, and even that, they say, is stressful.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The Prime Minister says reports that the Australian financial sector is concerned New Zealanders' anti-business are simply scaremongering. Jacinda Ardern has spoken to investors on the first day of her 2-day visit to Melbourne. Australian media have been reporting there are jitters about the New Zealand Reserve Bank's increasingly staunch approach to the major Australian banks and insurers. This week, the Reserve Bank stopped the sale of AMP's New Zealand and Australia life insurance businesses. But Ms Ardern says that issue wasn't raised with her at all today.
The Australian banks, they do quite well out of the New Zealand market. Essentially, all the Reserve Bank is looking at is whether or not enough safety mechanisms are in place. Again, as Bill English himself says that there's scaremongering going on in this debate, and some of the rhetoric I've heard, I'd probably support that view.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. The police have lifted the immediate emergency following a reported firearms incident at the Dunedin School of Art this afternoon, but they will continue to monitor the scene, and night classes have been cancelled. A man was allegedly seen brandishing what appeared to be a handgun just before 3 o'clock this afternoon. The School of Art was evacuated and cordoned off immediately, and a thorough inspection of the school's buildings was conducted. The majority of Otago Polytechnic's learners are currently on mid-semester break. However, the incident is being treated as serious to ensure the safety of staff and learners. A survivor of the Christchurch mosque attacks, Farid Ahmed, says he enjoyed meeting US President Donald Trump today at the White House. Mr Ahmed is in the US representing the Christchurch Muslim community as 27 survivors of religious persecution from 17 countries discuss religious freedoms. He says he found Mr Trump to be friendly and welcoming and listened well to the survivors who shared their plight and experiences. Mr Ahmed says he will be meeting Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, tomorrow. The family of a severely disabled man said they're still waiting for a fully accessible state house 7 years on. The 19-year-old has spastic quadriplegia, meaning he can't walk on his own and has severe curvature of spine, can't toilet or clean himself, and is blind. His parents say their state house is not fully wheelchair accessible and critical rooms don't fit the hoist provided to lift their son to shower or move him. A social worker, Alistair Russell, says Housing New Zealand acknowledged in 2012 that the current house was totally unsuitable for the family, yet they're still waiting.
This is absolutely appalling. It is completely unacceptable. It is not okay. It hasn't been okay since day one, and 7 years later it is still not okay. When do we as a society accept our responsibilities to actually provide for those people who have the highest levels of need?
Alistair Russell. Housing New Zealand says a lot of consideration is being taken to ensure this family's next house will suit their needs well into the future. A Taranaki woman says she's lucky to be alive after an electric blanket burst into flames on the bed she and her baby were lying in. 24-year-old Brittany Nawani and her 1-year-old son Shiv escaped unscathed, but their house was gutted in the Friday evening fire in Waitara. She says she only had enough time to get her baby to safety before the whole house was on fire.
The way that it was spreading, I knew, if I had stayed in there any longer, it could have been one of our lives that have lost.
Ms Nawani says the electric blanket was only 4 years old. New Plymouth fire investigator Andrew Cotter says the fire is a timely reminder for people to check that electric blankets are not damaged and that they're using them properly. Several people are dead and up to 10 critically injured after a fire broke out at an animation studio in the western Japanese city of Kyoto. Local media say a man scattered what appears to be petrol at the site. The police are questioning a man. And the All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says they'll take a loss to Argentina this weekend if it means they're better prepared for this year's Rugby World Cup. 5 debutants have been named in the New Zealand team for their opening rugby championship game in Buenos Aires on Sunday morning. Hansen has picked Sevu Reece to start on the right wing, while prop Atu Moli, loose forward Luke Jacobson, first 5 Josh Ioane and back Braden Ennor are on the bench.
We need to find out about Sevu if he's up to taking the next step at the higher level, and Braden Ennor, along with some of the other selections we've made. So the Rugby Championship is our third choice, the World Cup being number 1 and Bledisloe being number 2, and that we'd have to take some risks if we're going to get to the World Cup with the right group.
Hansen has selected Ngani Laumape and Anton Leonard-Brown in the midfield, with Geordie Barrett and Ben Smith completing the back 3. It's coming up to 6:05. Captain Laura Langman says the entire Silver Fern squad is ready to contribute to tonight's Netball World Cup clash against Australia. With 5 dominant wins under their belt, New Zealand faces the defending champion Diamonds in a match to determine seedings for the semi-finals. Langman says every player needs to be ready to step up against their Trans-Tasman rivals in Liverpool.
Our strength is going to lie in having 12 ready to go. Aussie are playing very clinical, so we're going to be able to have to really focus on our ball retention, and also too not taking the pedal off the metal when momentum's in our way. So that's pretty much what this 5 days has been about. Look after yourself, but when you're out there, you've got to bring some pep.
Laura Langman. Tonight's match starts at 9:30. The New Zealand footballer Sarpreet Singh has made his debut appearance for the Bayern Munich first team. Signed by the powerhouse German club from the Wellington Phoenix earlier this month, Singh has played the second half of Bayern's friendly against English giants Arsenal in Los Angeles. Auckland golfer Ryan Fox is hoping what he describes as one of the best courses in the world will help him get his game back in order. Fox gets underway in the Open Championship in Northern Ireland tonight, having missed the cut in his last 7 events. Despite having never played at the Royal Portrush course before, Fox likes links courses.
I enjoy the challenge of it, the creativity needed to try to get around, and I always feel I play pretty well in the wind. So, hopefully this week everything lines up and I can play some decent golf. But if not, as I said, I'm just out there to enjoy it and enjoy the atmosphere and not to put too much pressure on myself like I have been the last few weeks.
Ryan Fox tees off for his first round at 11:30. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, this week's cultural ambassador, Dunedin-based choreographer and filmmaker Daniel Belton. He likes to combine the two. We have a window on the world of African swine fever and what it means for Asian pork production. They are running paternity tests on kakapo in our changing world. And I visit Damien Scarf, who's running cognition tests on homing pigeons, lured into his loft laboratory with a few tasty treats. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The upper half of the North Island from Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine spells, isolated showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow, with some heavy and possibly thundery falls. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow and occasional rain from the afternoon. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, fine spells and isolated showers tonight. Occasional rain tomorrow. Marlborough and Nelson, cloud increasing with showers this evening. Rain tomorrow, heavy at times. Bulla to Fiordland, showers turning to rain this evening with heavy and possibly thundery falls, becoming mainly fine tomorrow with the odd shower. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, high cloud increasing. Patchy rain this evening. Mostly cloudy with rain at times tomorrow. Rain becoming more persistent north of Ashburton tomorrow evening. In Chatham Islands, a few showers. You're with RNZ National. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Let's return to our story earlier in the program, which is about a young man and his family who are waiting for a fully accessible house from Housing New Zealand. They've been on the waiting list, they say, for 7 years. We've had so much feedback about this story. Let's get to some of it. Judith has got in contact, and I'm sorry, Judith, I cut you short just before the news. So, apologies for that. And this is what Judith had to say in full. I am the parent of a 25-year-old with an intellectual disability. We are middle-income New Zealanders, both in work. We live in a dry, comfortable home, and our daughter has no medical issues that need the sort of intensive daily attention your story talks about. Yet life can be very stressful because of her disability. I don't know how this family is coping without the fundamental help they need. Someone else has been in touch to say this is the perfect example of bureaucrats who are never accountable. A disgusting reflection of everything that is wrong with the false promises of the transformational government. Fiona has been in touch to say, how can social services have been allowed to run down to such a desperate degree over the last decade? Steve has also messaged us. He says the story is making him cry. Sorry, Steve, not intended to do that, just to highlight the issues. And David also says 7 years for a state house is shocking. I think all new state homes should be built with fully accessible by design. And David signs off #access matters. We should say we did invite Housing New Zealand and the Ministry of Social Development on the program to discuss the issues that story raised. MSD declined, saying that Housing New Zealand were the ones that, started off with that particular family. Housing New Zealand hasn't responded to our interview request, and both ministries say that they are taking the family's concerns on board, and that they are giving full consideration, Housing New Zealand says, to ensuring that the next house that family is moved into will be suitable into the future. Doctors and infectious disease experts are meeting with Health Ministry officials tomorrow to push for urgent action on dealing with a big gap in measles immunity among young people. Recently revealed documents show the Health Ministry has been sitting on advice from the National Measles Elimination Verification Committee about reducing the gap for at least a year, while the country struggles with its biggest outbreak since 2011. Harry Locke reports.
New Zealand officially eliminated measles 2 years ago, but at the last count there have been 311 confirmed cases of measles this year. That's 31 more than in the entire year of 2014, the time of the last major outbreak. Olivia Hope Simcock was one of those who got sick. She was 16 at the time.
So my whole family was put into isolation. They had a person come over and test us every day, and they were in full head to toe, beekeeper kind of outfit. Basically, the easiest way to put it is it was everything. Sore throat, cold, cough, vomiting, diarrhea, and then the rash came up later.
If the current strain of the virus continues circulating for 12 months, the country will lose its official measles-free status. Auckland Regional Public Health Service Clinical Director, Dr. Julia Peters.
We are having confirmed cases notified every day. The measles virus is extremely infectious, and even the briefest exposure can lead to non-immune people contracting the disease. The only way we are going to bring this outbreak under control is for people to get vaccinated.
40% of confirmed cases this year have ended up in hospital, and along with babies too young to be immunised, it's young people who are particularly at risk due to the so-called immunity gap. This is the generation of New Zealanders in their teens to mid-30s who are less likely to be fully vaccinated. Public health physician Dr. Sarah Jeffries works at the Environmental Science and Research Institute, who collate the data.
So there are currently 4 main outbreaks that are active, a higher number coming from the Auckland region currently. Most cases are in the unvaccinated group. We know that the measles vaccine is highly effective, so we'd expect that to be the case.
But in a statement to RNZ, Dr. Nikki Turner, who chairs the National Measles Elimination Verification Committee, says the immunity gap still needs to be addressed. Dr Turner will be in Geneva next week for the International Measles Committee. Dr Helen Patousis-Harris, a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland and director of the Vaccine Data Link and Research Group, says the ministry has been told what to do plenty of times.
I think they've had all the expert advice that they need. I think the ball is in their court. We just sort of have to continue to hope that we will be able to plug these gaps. But I think we're all sounding a little bit like stuck records. You know, we've had these ongoing outbreaks for years now, and every time we say the same thing, that we've really got to get these people in these age groups vaccinated.
In a statement to RNZ, the Director of Public Health, Dr Caroline McElnay, said the ministry is currently reviewing the best approach to ensure this age group takes up this free vaccine. The ministry has already spent $35,000 on one radio campaign to raise awareness. Dr McElnay says the ministry works with district health boards and public health units to support their response in their communities. However, experts fear if the immunity gap isn't addressed, we could be facing more outbreaks in the years ahead. Because measles is just a plane ride away. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
And to breaking news overseas now, there are reports at least 10 people have died in a suspected arson attack at an animation studio in the Japanese city of Kyoto. Local media are quoting police as saying a man broke into the Kyoto animation studio and sprayed an unidentified liquid around. Dozens of people are also reported to have been injured. The suspect, who has not been named, has been detained and was taken to hospital with injuries. No other details of the suspect or possible motives have been given. The public broadcaster NHK says the man had been heard saying "drop dead" as he set fire to the building. Back home now, the first group of Black Caps arrived home this morning after their nail-biting World Cup loss against England on Monday. 7 players were welcomed to applause from a handful of supporters at Auckland Airport, with Trent Boult, who bowled the super over, apologising for letting the country down. Jordan Bond and videographer Dan Cook were there.
It is what it is, was the phrase on all the Black Caps' lips this morning after a marathon journey from the UK capping off a marathon tournament. Trent Boult was bare in his emotions.
I'd love it to sink in so we can get over it, but yeah, it's probably one of those things we're not going to get over for a wee while now.
Boult probably played one of the biggest roles for the Black Caps in their heartbreaking loss against England just 4 days ago, bowling New Zealand's controversial super over. The 29-year-old took 17 wickets in the tournament, the 7th most, and his consistently dangerous pace and swing had him named in the team of the tournament as the 12th man. But a world-class performance across the tournament was overshadowed, and he says he'll be running it over in his mind in the most quintessential Kiwi way.
I'm going to go home for the first time in about 4 months. Probably going to walk my dog along the beach and try to put it aside. I'm sure he won't be too angry at me, but yeah, hey, we've got a quick turnaround before we go to Sri Lanka in a couple of days' time, and we'll be back in the saddle. So, like I said, it's not going to be something that disappears over the next kind of couple of days. It's probably something that's going to be quite hard to swallow still over the next couple of years.
In England's penultimate over, Boult took a catch off a big Ben Stokes heave, but accidentally stepped on the boundary rope, conceding 6 runs.
Obviously the priority's on the ball itself, so that's all I was really worried about. Yeah, silly of me obviously to not know where the rope was. It was similar to the catch I got against the West Indies earlier in the tournament, but they're quite quirky boundaries over there. They're not actually circles, they're kind of octagons and squares and all sorts of things. So obviously you could imagine my feeling when I felt my left shoe hit the cushion, and it was too late for me to throw it to Marty. So yeah, bit of a shame.
Tim Southey played less of the tournament than he would have liked, just 1 game, but came on as a substitute fielder in the final and took a critical catch to remove England's vice-captain Jos Buttler and break a dangerous partnership. He says it's been an emotional few days for the players, but they're proud of what they achieved and how they carried themselves.
There's a lot of disappointment and a number of other words you could use to, I guess, sum up the result. But I guess when you look past that, past the result, and look back on what you've achieved, and I guess the messages from back home, and I guess it is quite a proud moment to be a Kiwi cricketer.
Leg spin bowler Ish Sodhi also played 1 game. He was on the sideline for the final and could only watch like the rest of us.
Yeah, look, it was nerve-wracking. At the best of times, a lot of my nails got absolutely disfigured during that game. But I think I really felt for the guys like Trent, Jimmy and Gup, the guys that were in the heat of the battle during those tense moments of that game. And I think we were all just sharing in the a bit of devastation what they were going through.
Tim Southey's level-headed and taking the loss on the chin.
That's the sport we play. It's you got to move on and move on to the next challenge, and that's Sri Lanka in a couple of weeks' time.
Trent Bolt says he's grateful for the support the team received from around the world.
Obviously we're all hurting, and sorry for letting everyone down.
More of the team return home next week, while others have taken advantage of the European summer before flying to Canada for the global T20 tournament beginning next week. The Black Caps will reassemble as a team again for their month-long tour of Sri Lanka beginning on August 8th. I tamaki makoto mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, tēnei.
It's almost 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The rapid erosion of a Timaru coastal wall is forcing some sports groups to move their sports rooms. The South Canterbury Deerstalkers Association and the Timaru Pistol Club have shared a combined club room on the edge of Patiti Point for about 30 years. The sea wall there is about 6 metres high and its edge is about 10 metres away from the nearby building, and that distance is only shrinking fast. Our reporter Nicholas Poynton reports from Timaru.
On the coastline in Timaru, two sports clubs are only metres away from falling into the sea. Coastal erosion has eaten away the Patiti Point sea wall, and the council has shut the neighbouring footpaths in the last few weeks. The South Canterbury Deerstalkers Association's club rooms are on the other side of that footpath. Its president, Tim McCarthy, says they have seen the cliffs disappear rapidly over the past few weeks.
Well, the last few weeks we've seen the council have had to pull out all the fence along the side and try and recover it before it falls into the sea. Last week there was a significant amount fell off the bank, about 2 to 2.5 metres, and it just goes straight down. It's not just a wee bit falls off, tons and tons of clay fall off. And last night when we were down there looking over the fence, there was some seriously big lumps of clay there, like half-ton lumps of clay that had only just fallen down.
A little too close for comfort for the club, which has been at Patiti Point for nearly 30 years. Mr McCarthy says they've been left with no choice but to relocate the club rooms down the road to a new site provided by the council.
Next for us, we have to get our plans into the council for the foundations. There's a bit of excavation needed to be done on the new site to get the club rooms level. And once we do that, then we can get the shifters in and lift it up and shift it. And you'll see we've got to clear an opening where the fence is now is not wide enough, so we need to get a couple of trees out of the way that are there, and so we can get the club rooms out.
Nearby Timaru Pistol Club are in a similar boat. One member, Michael Carroll, got quite the shock when he returned from a 6-week tour of Canada. Mr Carroll is the last surviving inaugural member of the club, which started in 1974. He says his club will need help from council if they too have to move.
Hopefully the council might come up with something to help us. It's their land, and they haven't done anything about preserving the bank, so we're at the peril of the sea. And we don't know whether the President's been speaking to the council or not, but unless they support us to shift, we're going to find it a bit of a struggle.
Talks are underway about whether the Pistol Club was also going to have to move. Timaru City Council's Land Transport Manager, Andrew Dixon, says nature has the upper hand.
The council believes that we can't beat the Pacific Ocean, so we're in basically the strategy has been a gradual retreat. So we've always been, safety has been paramount in all cases. We've had engineering consultants come and look at this, and they advised us, they gave us, once the cliff got within 1.5 metres, we were to then push the fencing back. That has happened a number of times, but now there's nothing to move back on, no retreating.
He says prior to 2018, the seawall eroded at around 0.5 metre per year. But the wall has shrunk by around 10 metres in the past 12 months. Mr Dixon says he's not entirely sure why it's changed.
Really, it's been eroding for quite a while, but only a minimal amount. But it's February last year, we got the tail end of Cyclone Gita, which really started the erosion in a much more rapid way.
So it's now a race against the ocean to keep these clubs on dry land. In Timaru, for Checkpoint, ko Nicholas Poynton, tēnei.
And if you're listening to that one on the drive home, do go online. Nicholas's piece will go up on our webpage and our Facebook page. And you can look at those remarkable photos of the sea just chomping away at the cliffside there. The Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman will spend the rest of his life in a US jail. The lawyers for the former head of the Sinaloa cartel, which officials say was the biggest supplier of drugs to the US, are already saying they will appeal the sentence. Gillian Kitchener has more.
One of the world's most notorious drug lords, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, sentenced Wednesday to life in prison plus 30 years after a federal judge accused him of overwhelming evil. The judge also ordered Guzman to forfeit $12.6 billion. Guzman was convicted in February for smuggling drugs into the U.S. over more than 2 decades, sealing his power in Mexico through murders and wars with rival cartels. Federal law enforcement officials hailed Wednesday's sentencing as a major victory.
This sentence is significant and it is well deserved. It means that never again will Guzman pour poison over our borders, making billions while innocent lives are lost to drug violence and drug addiction.
During Guzman's 11-week trial in New York, over 50 witnesses came forward, giving astonishing insight into the Sinaloa drug cartel's inner workings, including Guzman's lavish lifestyle and penchant for murdering his enemies. Guzman is also known for his dramatic escapes. He first broke out from a Mexican prison in 2001 and wasn't recaptured and imprisoned again until 2014. Then he pulled off another stunning escape the following year when he disappeared into a mile-long tunnel dug into his maximum security prison cell. Guzman was recaptured in 2016 after a shootout in Sinaloa and extradited to the United States. Speaking during his sentencing hearing Wednesday, 62-year-old Guzman said his confinement over the last several years in a New York jail has been, quote, psychological, emotional, mental torture 24 hours a day. Guzman's attorney says his family is suffering too. His wife Emma appeared in court for the sentencing.
She's crushed by this. This has been an incredibly arduous situation, not just as his wife, but as the mother of his 2 beloved children.
Guzman's lawyers say they will appeal, alleging that jurors were influenced by media accounts of the trial.
It was not justice. You can't have a situation where jurors are running around lying to a judge. Lying to a judge about what they were doing and learning about allegations that were purposely kept out by the government.
Authorities have not said where Guzman will be imprisoned, but he's expected to spend the rest of his life in Colorado's so-called Alcatraz of the Rockies, which houses the most dangerous inmates in the country.
Gillian Kitchener reporting. Wellington's famous Basin Reserve is on the block to get a makeover, but the proposed name change is dividing locals. Several Olympians and organisations are pushing for the cricket ground's name to be changed to Support Women's Sport Basin Reserve. A crowdfunding campaign is trying to raise the $100,000 needed to buy the naming rights. Our reporter Jonathan Mitchell and visual journalist Anna Tovey went to the streets to see what people think of the name Support Women's Sport Basin Reserve.
It's a very hard name to say, but that Basin Reserve is a name that everyone will remember forever. You know, it's always been the Basin Reserve.
If I recall correctly what I saw on the news last night, the name that was being proposed to me didn't resonate. It didn't, wouldn't really make me think about women's sport.
I don't mind, to be honest with you. I mean, if it promotes women's sport, I'm all for it. So I'm not particularly worried about a change of a name. It's still got Basin Reserve in, so it's pretty good for me.
I don't really see that it's necessary, but, other people have their own opinion. Yeah.
Why is it not necessary?
I think it will always be the Basin Reserve, regardless of what name, it's given.
While the intention behind the campaign is supported, the mouthful of a name is being described as dumb, idiotic and nonsense. Sport Hawke's Bay's chair Damon Harvey says the name needs to be short and direct.
If I'm 100% honest, I'm not that keen on the actual name.
I think we could be a little bit more creative with the name, and that's where the girls can type of message I think is really strong, whereas this one just doesn't seem to roll off the tongue as well.
He says women are heavily underrepresented in nationwide sport and reckons this campaign misses the mark.
It is about participation, but you have to engage and excite an audience, excite the community, and I don't necessarily think that this name does that. The idea is fantastic, but I would like to see a little bit more thought go into what is the brand or the positioning.
Tabitha Lork is 22 and lives in Wellington. She played a lot of sport at school and nowadays is an avid indoor netballer. Ms. Lork says women are severely underpaid in sport and that needs to change.
I do think the fact it's not a very good career opportunity, there's not great career opportunities out there. You read stories all the time about how the women's rugby team, for example, they're the best in the world, yet they're on a retainer of 20k. So, you still have to work full time.
And it's the pay equity, is it?
Yeah. I just think it comes down to the opportunities out there.
She says to her and her friends, it's always going to be simply the Basin.
I think the Basin Reserve's always been known as the Basin Reserve, and I do think people will still continue to call it the Basin Reserve. But, the fact we're talking about it, the fact you drive past and see a name change, all that creates exposure around women's sport.
The organisers behind the name change admit the name is difficult for a reason. It gets the message out there. So far, about $7,000 has been raised on Pledge Me. The minimum target is to get to $50,000, with $100,000 the main goal. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
Let's get to some of your feedback before we have to go. This is about the Taranaki fire that was caused by an electric blanket. It was a house fire, pretty serious there. Paul has got in contact, and Paul describes himself as a science teacher, semi-retired. He says, we've never liked to lie on and sleep on our electric blanket. Apart from the safety considerations, it has quite a strong EMF, electromagnetic field or force, enough to heat a large, cold bed. Many people feel it is unwise to be exposed to this for extended hours, in spite of the science experts who always reassure us that they know it all, says Paul. We switch on half an hour before bed, then fully unplug, capital letters, to avoid a residual EMF, even if a current is not actually flowing. Of course, we also have working smoke alarms in essential spots. Thanks, Paul. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister says she'll raise the deportation of New Zealand citizens with criminal records when she meets her Australian counterpart in Melbourne tomorrow. A specialist fire investigator says the Taranaki house fire caused by a faulty electric blanket is a timely reminder for people to use them safely. A Far North Māori leader has started legal proceedings against the government over its failure to act fast enough on climate change. And Dunedin has not given up the fight to claim the world's steepest street, even though the title has been officially stripped from Baldwin Street by Guinness World Records. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
What's come about since March 15 is that we need to celebrate more what we have in common rather than what we have as differences.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
I think we had 25 films from